And so the king set out with a flotilla of his fastest ships, and cried out in joy as the glittering city of Ilia was revealed to him. They landed in the city with the queen's body in solemn procession. The Iron Order led the way, only to be met by the city's masters, who refused to help. Death, they insisted, was final. To cheat it would be to break the natural order of the world. The king flew into a fevered rage and commanded Callista to slay any who opposed them. She refused and called on Echorim to stand with her, but instead he smiled as he drove his spear through her armored back. The Iron Order joined him with this treachery, piercing Callista's body a dozen times more as she fell. A brutal melee erupted, with those devoted to Callista fighting desperately against Echorim's knights, but their numbers were too few. As Callista's life faded, she watched her warriors die, swearing vengeance with her final breath. Echorim ordered his knights to ransack the city, looting its vaults of arcane treasures. With his great army, Viego stormed the peaceful country by force, slaughtering everyone who stood in his way. Thresh delighted in the slaughter that followed. The invading king was obsessed with resurrecting his dead queen, and Thresh willingly led him to the inner sanctum of the Isles, to the fabled waters of life. None but the most senior members of the Order had ever been permitted to enter the hidden catacomb that housed the waters. Now, with the king's greatest warriors at his back, Thresh laughed as the guardians of that sacred place were cut down before him. Finally, he believed he would get what he long deserved. The king lowered the lifeless corpse of his wife into the waters. She would return to him, no matter the destruction he wrought, no matter the cost. And for one moment, she did. Isolde arose a horrifying wraith of shadow and rage, and in her pain, her anger, her confusion at being ripped from death, she took Viego's enchanted blade and thrust it through his heart. The magic of the waters and the ancient sword clashed, and the chamber's energy erupted, tearing across the Isles and trapping everything it touched in tortured conscience and death. A catastrophic blast wave of dark energy surged outward, engulfing Hylia and spreading rapidly across the rest of the Blessed Isles. And the white mist that had once protected them turned black and predatory. Every living thing in its path perished in an instant, and yet their spirits could not move on. The magical cataclysm left a barrier between the material and spirit realms in tatters, effectively merging the two. Now those who perish within the mist are condemned to haunt this nightmarish place for eternity. Worse still, the power of the Shadow Isles appears to wax stronger with every passing year, allowing the most powerful specters to roam further and further across Runeterra, with each soul it claims. The region most affected by the harrowing is Bilgewater, but it is known to affect other regions as well. Today, none but the most desperate scavengers and treasure hunters dare to visit the ruins of Ilia, in the search of the countless arcane treasures that must surely remain buried there. Some mortals have even learned to live close to the shadows and decay, though who can even begin to guess what horrors they might have witnessed there. The spirits are often referred to as the lost. After being trapped in the Isles, they begin to slowly forget who they were in life. Some of them are entirely ethereal and relatively easy to bind or destroy. Some prove themselves to be essentially immortal and retain much of their personality and desires. Over time, these spirits' appearance changes to reflect their most essential qualities. The less powerful can only manifest during a narrowing. The most powerful, however, can manifest elsewhere in the world at will. Some spirits are bound to a physical anchor. Their armor, a book, or some other talisman. Sorcery and hextech are known to harm these spirits, as well as weapons made from silver, blessed, or infused with arcane power. Some can also be harmed by fire and direct sunlight. This part of how to defeat them is a note from the Realms of Runeterra book. It's unknown who wrote it, but if it isn't someone from Bilgewater, I have my theories on who did it. A mortal who sets foot upon the Shadow Isles will attract spirits that reflect their own emotional state, or those who prey upon it. An individual filled with rage and anger will find themselves beset by screeching, howling wraiths, while someone with uncertainty in their heart will likely encounter only those that seek to feed on fear. And now, let's see what happened to each character. Thresh himself was among the first to be claimed, but while others screamed in anguish at their fate, he reveled in it. He now strives to break his victims as slowly as possible by learning their fears and weaknesses and toying with them to the very end, before trapping their souls in his lantern. Centuries passed since humans arrived on the island, and Maokai lived in idyllic contentment until a fleet of soldiers from across the sea beached upon the shores of the Isles. Maokai sensed something was terribly wrong. As the ruination spread, Maokai desperately plunged his roots deep into the ground and drank of the healing waters, saturating every fiber of his being with their magic. Before the cursed water reached him, Maokai withdrew his roots, severing all connections to the pool. He howled in rage as the sacred reservoir he had entrusted to man was fully corrupted, the spiraling coils churning underwater until nothing pure remained. Moments later, the mist surrounding the islands blackened and spread over the land, trapping all living things in an unnatural state between life and death. Maokai watched in helpless agony as all he knew twisted into wretched shades. His fury grew. The great beauty he had cultivated from tiny saplings fell to ruin in an instant at the careless hand of men. The enervating mist coiled around Maokai, and he wept as the bright flowers adorning his shoulders crumbled and fell to dust. His body shuddered and contorted into a mass of gnarled roots and tangled branches as the mist leached life from him. But Maokai's heart was saturated with the precious waters of life, saving him from the terrible fate of undeath. As the Blessed Isle's first nature spirit, he would remain and fight for the soul of the land. Some days, Maokai subdues the mist and its deathless spirits, breaking their hold on a grove of trees or a small thicket. Though new life has not bloomed in such cursed soil for an age, Maokai strives to carve havens, however temporary, free from regret and decay. One morning, as he tended to his duties in the cemetery, Yorick was interrupted by the sight of a pitch-black cloud rolling across the surface of the Blessed Isles, devouring everything in its path. Yorick tried to run, but the cloud quickly enveloped him and plunged him into shadow. All around Yorick, living things began to writhe and contort, corrupted by the foul magic in the black mist. People, animals, even plants began to transform into vile, ghoulish mockeries of their former selves. Whispers emanated from the turbulent air around him, and his brothers began ripping their vials of healing water from their necks as if the objects were causing them great anguish. A moment later, Yorick watched in horror as the monks' souls were ripped from their bodies, leaving cold, pale corpses behind. Among the quieting screams of his brethren, Yorick alone could hear voices within the mist. "Remove it! Join us! We will become one!" He felt his fingers grasping for the vial at his neck. Mastering all his resolve, Yorick forced his hands away from his throat and commanding the howling souls to stop. The black mist writhed violently, and darkness overtook him. When Yorick awoke, the winds had calmed, and the once fertile lands had transformed into the grotesque hellscape of the Shadow Isles. Isolated tendrils of the black mist clung to him, trying to overtake the one living thing not yet corrupted. As the mist wrapped itself around him, Yorick saw it suddenly recoil from the vial at his neck. Yorick clutched to the blessed water, realizing it was all that kept him alive. In the days that followed, Yorick scoured the islands for the survivors, but found only the twisted remnants of what once lived there. As he searched, Yorick slowly pieced together the events that led to the cataclysm. Yorick wished to find this ruined king and undo the curse he had unleashed, but he felt powerless in the face of the seemingly endless death that surrounded him. Almost lost within his grief, Yorick began to speak to the spirits around him, attempting to find solace with them as he had as a child. Instead, as he communed with the mist, corpses left their graves, guided by his voice. He realized the bodies he once laid to rest were now his to command. A glimmer of hope shone from the heart of his despair. To free the dead of the Shadow Isles, Yorick would wield their power and their strength. To end the curse, he would be forced to use it. I should also mention that his maiden is somehow connected to his old. We don't know how, but since Yorick's bio is likely not up to date, we'll get our answers soon. I have a theory, which I will share later. Amid the chaos, a lowly custodian agreed to grant the king access to the waters of life, but not even this could distract Ekrem from the revelry of bloodshed, and so the ruination of the Blessed Isles would take him almost completely by surprise. A blast wave of magical force tore across Ilia, shattering every last building and leaving the fragments suspended in searching sunlight. In its wake came the black mist, a billowing hurricane that dragged every living creature it touched into its shrieking, roiling embrace. Ekrem tried to rally the Iron Order, hoping to make it back to their ships, but the mist claimed them one by one as they fled. Alone and defiant to the end, the Knight Commander was taken by the shadows. He and his mighty steed were fused into a monstrous, spectral abomination that reflected the darkness in Echorim's heart, a brazen creature of fury and spite, at one with the black mist and yet utterly enslaved by it. Bound forevermore to these Shadow Isles, Echorim has spent centuries in a sinister mockery of his former life, cursed to patrol the nightmarish lands he once intended to conquer. Whenever the black mist reaches out beyond their shores, he and the otherworldly host of the Iron Order ride out to slaughter the living in memory of glories long past. When Callista opened her eyes, they were filled with the dark power of unnatural magic. She had no idea what had transpired, but the city of Ilia had been transformed into a twisted mockery of its former beauty. Indeed, the entirety of the Blessed Isles was now a place of shadow and darkness, filled with the howling spirits trapped for all eternity in the nightmare of undeath. Though she tried to cling to those fragmented memories of Echorim's monstrous betrayal, they had slowly faded in all the centuries since, and all that now remains is a thirst for revenge, burning in Callista's wounded chest. She has become a spectre, a figure of macabre folklore, often invoked by those who have suffered similar treacheries. These wretched spirits are subsumed into hers to pay the ultimate price, becoming one with the spear of vengeance. The betrayed may cry out in blood to be avenged, but Callista only answers those willing to play with their very souls. Those who become the focus of Callista's wrath should make their final peace, for any pact sealed with this grim hunter can only be ended by the cold, piercing fire of her soul spears. Viego remembers nothing of his last moments alive. His country collapsed into ruin, great nations rose and fell, and in time even his name was forgotten, until 1,000 years after his death, Viego stood once more, and this time he would not fail. His mind twisted by the same dangerous obsession he possessed in life. Viego's unflinching, deranged love fuels his every action, his every desire, his every atrocity. The deadly black mist pours freely from Viego's broken heart, ripping the life from everything it touches, and he uses the mist to scour the world for some way to return his soul to his side. Legions will fall before him, only to rise again in his service. Continents will be swallowed by living darkness, and the world will pay for every moment of happiness it stole from an ancient ruler laid low by an all-consuming love. He cares not for the destruction he causes, so long as he can see his soul's face again. His reign is terror, his love is eternal, and until his soul returns to him, all will fall before the ruined king. Their color stories don't add much to the lore of the Shadow Isles, but exist mostly to show us what the characters are up to right now. In the collection, Thresh collected one of the many souls he tormented for years. In Nightbloom, Maokai finds a Nightbloom flower. He tries to protect it against specters, but the flower dies. In Invocation, Callista was summoned by a woman who was betrayed. She impaled herself with Callista's blackened spear, turning into a shade, forever linked to Callista. In No One Lives, Echorim murders men that sailed to the Shadow Isles. After the spirits left their bodies, they circled Echorim, beholden to him as their killer, and he revealed in the surging joy of battle. He ignored the wailing spirits. He had no interest in enslaving them. Leave such petty cruelties to the Chain Warden. All Echorim cared for was killing. In Last Rites, Yorick tries to save a man whose ship crashed on the shores of the Shadow Isles. Realizing the man was doomed, and if Yorick gave him the tears of life, so would he, Yorick let the man die, and then poured a thin strand of mist into the man's body, reanimating the corpse and sending it in search of a way to end the curse of the Isles. I still haven't mentioned Ledros, who, in life, was the king's champion who fell in love with Callista. He tried to give her a silver pendant, a symbol of their love, but she refused due to their positions at the court. When Viego turned on Callista, Ledros likely fought on her side. He now blames himself for her death and seeks to save Callista's soul. But just like everything in the Isles, they are stuck in an endless nightmare that they cannot escape. He tried to give her her pendant, but this didn't bring her memories back. His next idea was to name himself a betrayer, summoning Callista and telling her he had betrayed her for not saving her. His pledge led to Callista killing him, and as he dissolved into mist, she recognized him. The next time he returned, Callista was there to meet him. At first, he rejoiced, until he realized it too had not worked. Callista accepted his pledge and moved on to the next betrayer. After centuries of failing to save Callista, Ledros realized that the only way to save her was to put an end to their curse, and so he is now trying to end the Ruination. His story, The Echoes Left Behind, ends with Thresh picking up the silver pendant Ledros had thrown away. Little did Ledros heroes know he was in the blink of bringing Callista back. Thresh smiled cruelly and tossed a pendant within his lantern. Being a character so close to Viego, it makes sense to see him present in the game. His story also mentions how he was cast back to the darkness multiple times, by a purple-skinned sorcerer, by the faith of indigenous witches of Bilgewater, and even by a blade that seared him with the intensity of the sun.